probably my phone.
So, digital. Who likes digital? Who hates digital? Oh, there's at least one over there. I tell you what, the vice chairman of the 6 metre group, Trev, D3ZYY, hates digital with a passion. It's not real radio and all that stuff. I like it, actually. But anyway, whatever. It's happening. FT8 was developed for 6 metres. And Taylor will say that they didn't really expect it. They didn't expect it to take off at HF at all. But it did. It was, if you like, it was filling a niche that people didn't know was there.
Well, JT65 is just too slow, isn't it?
Well, that's the problem. And although it is a bit more sensitive. So in June last year, we were working on JT65. FT8 came out. We all mostly switched to FT8. Although interestingly, these polar contacts. Am I going to get timed out at some point?
No,
we're okay. I mean, if you get bored, just go. So they were using anyway. The VK to South America contacts were JT65 still, even though it's bloody slow. And the trouble with that is that by the time you've done your first over, they've disappeared. That's the problem, because sporadic is sporadic. That's the whole thing about it. They're localised patches of ionisation. They move, and you're in it 1 minute and you're off it the next. And in fact, there's a whole other topic that I could talk about polarisation effects in sporadic E, and it's rotating quite fast, and so you get when I say quite fast, between on timescale between seconds and minutes. And so signals can be very unstable. Hence, something quicker like FT8 is better, and particularly for sporadic E, and that's what it was developed for. MSK144 was developed specifically for meteor scatter, and whereas FT8 is 50 hertz wide, and so you fit up to theoretically 60 QSOs into a 3 kilohertz bandwidth. MSK144 is 2.7 kcs wide, but it will pick a call sign out of a very short ping, and people use WSGTX, which is the original, where the engineered GTX, MSHV and things. These are reasonably straightforward to get working, as long as you pay attention to earth loops and hum and stuff like that, or if you're using an SDR when you don't need any of those connections at all like that. So just a bit of evidence then. That's my screen from 8th of June. I told you it started early, you see. Last year, and without sort of going into detail, you can see a lot of Japanese stations here.
Wow.
Yeah. And you can see it was 7:57, 65 Zulu, so around 9 o'clock. First time I worked it, I think, was in 2006. It was mainly before 8 o'clock, if I remember rightly. But it's that kind of morning period, and it's morning over there as well. But no, it's not grey line, but it is morning at both ends and dark in the middle. So that's a JTDX screen. It looks at the WSJT one would look slightly different. Remember I showed you before, I played that recording of a meteor scatter signal which just comes up, there's a certain amount of Doppler, and then usually they're quite a lot shorter than the one that I played. So this is a meteor scatter contact on my. I don't do meteor scatter much. It doesn't do much for me. But
got to be patient.
Well, it's something like that. You're not really. I mean, you know it's going to work in the end. Usually, it's not really. Anyway, whatever. So this is in a package called MSHV. Underneath it is still Joe Taylor's stuff, the software, the coding software. And so this is a timeline of the signal strength, and you can see that here was a ping, and you've got sort of a pan adapter and a waterfall type of display, And out of that, and you can see the timeline here, seconds. So you've got there a ping that was about, what, 1.5 to 2 seconds long. The ping, if you've ever tried meteor scatter on 2 meters, the pings are significantly longer on 6. They're longer on 6. It's easier to work meteor scatter on 6 than it is on 2. The same cannot be said for moon bounce, it's the other way around. So, loads of people do that, and during the winter these days there's activity all the time on 6 meters. In the winter they'll generally be doing this and looking out for a bit of sporadic E, and in the summer most of that will fall off and people will do work using other modes. So, if that all makes sense, if there's any questions about any of that, and so I apologise for the people like particularly sort of peering around the pillar.
When you're transmitting on digital modes, how do you know which one to use to get the optimum result?
Well, you have to have an idea of what kind of propagation you're trying to find. So if you're looking for meteors, I mean, don't forget, you've got access to the packet cluster and that kind of stuff. And these, all these modes will feed data on what the station can hear into a thing called PSK Reporter. I don't know if you're familiar with that. But that's really quite nice because you can put it out of transmission and see who's hearing you, which is actually quite good. So you sort of learn after a while, if you like. In June, July, if you pick FT8, you won't go far wrong. It's just the same as, which way are you going to beam? Well, you look out for evidence of, when I first started, we would look for TV stations, TV signals, band 1 television.
There still seems to be a lot of that coming from some of the
Eastern Europeans, the Russians are still doing it. But then, Spain, Italy, Hungary, Germany, I used to do DXTV. So, digital, meteor scatter. Let's talk a bit about getting started then, if you want to have a play. I just realised what it says there. Yes, SSB and CW were the main modes for working DX.
Yeah.
I'm not sure now, to be honest. There's still plenty of it, and I think it's going to stabilise. FTA is, somebody called it a bright, shiny thing that everybody's playing with, but after a while it is very basic. It's designed for very basic concepts. CW, if you can't use CW and you don't use digital, then you're going to miss quite a lot. Digital is growing. There is FM. In due course, we've had various discussions about narrow bandwidth digital TV on 6, and that would be quite interesting. But there isn't really the bandwidth to put it in at the moment, which is part of the justification for the RSGB through IARU going to the next World Administrative Radio Conference asking for 50 to 54 in Region 1. I don't know what we're going to get, but they're asking for it. And the justification for that, or one of the key justifications, is the ability to use wider band modes. You're only talking a few hundred kilohertz, rather than the old days where it might be 6 megs, 8 megs. But it's still a lot wider than will easily fit in what we've got at the moment. But I know there have been some experiments on 6 with TV, on the current band with TV. So if you want to work, and DX is a relative term, if you want to work outside this country, then you're well off either going digital or SSB, CW. You can work things on intermediate powers. You can work it on foundation power, on whatever you can get, and you'll work something. As a starter. The weakness of the vertical, particularly, but also dipole, is really going to be noise pickup rather than anything else. When the band is well open, you will hear stuff and you will be able to work around Europe. Most people are using the sort of 100 watts, medium-sized beam, and obviously you can...
What's the range of 6 metres on local contacts, so Edinburgh or?
You can Tropo per se, as in sort of enhanced Tropo, is a bit less common on 6 than it is on 2. I could work up to the northwest, I guess, on SSB.
On a regular basis?
Yeah, reasonably on SSB, but with a well-equipped station at the other end.
So what about if you want to turn on your radio and you want to talk to somebody, say, in Cornwall, from Reading?
It depends who he is and whether what he's got.
Yeah. Would you do it on a vertical?
No. For that, you'd need both of you to be working with a beam and a reasonable amount of power to be reliable.
So what about local contacts then? How far would you go on, say, a vertical?
6
miles, 10 miles?
Oh, no, more than that, but 50 miles.
50 miles?
Yeah.
Okay.
On SSB.
On your ASL, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It depends on your site, it depends on your local noise level. But to tell you what, the thing is that the signals from around Europe are going to be so much stronger anyway that they're easier to work, if anything. The ones from around
Have you
the
tried
Italians.
the activity contest?
Yeah.
I tried it on a dipole
Yeah.
with 100 watts,
Yeah.
and it's a bit more of a struggle than the 4 metre one,
Oh, that's interesting.
which is a bit more of a struggle than
The 2 metre one. Yeah.
2 metres,
Yeah, although actually Tropo was discovered at 6 metres, or 5 I think it was actually, 5 metres.
So it does work,
yeah,
but it's a bit
it
harder
does.
because
Yeah. And if anything, it's more likely to have a dip than it is a peak. Yeah, so Tropo works. I could work around the country. Again, on FT8, there are contacts all the time going on around the UK. I've worked. There was a contest. The RSGB had started a digital contests on 6 and 2, and there was one on over the weekend. And I was just working out to Scotland and
the problem I find, I've got a dipole at the moment, and
Yeah.
the problem is noise.
Yeah.
It's just so noisy.
Yeah.
So,
That's why a small beam is worth having, even though you might think that the gain is not up to much, but it's the attenuation off the side. Yeah, well, but this is life, isn't it? I mean, the bigger it is, the more power you use, you're going to get more. Okay, but the point is that you will work stuff with something fairly basic, and then you might decide you want to do more, or you might not. And in fact, if only to prove the point, this is my friend Robin M1DUD, who's a bit of a QRPer, and this is from a few years ago when he produced this slide for us. You can see his power down the left there, down to 250 milliwatts, and how many countries he's worked, how many locators he's worked, and how far he's worked. So, you know, you don't have to be. Now, he would have been using a 5-element tonneau sort of aerial, you know, sort of a 12-foot type jobbing. Tonners were really good in their day, actually. So it would have been a better than a dipole antenna. But is your dipole horizontal or vertical?
it's horizontal or vertical, depending on which I put it.
Oh, right, fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah, well, I'm not saying you'd work KP4EIT, but you know, you don't need lots of power to do
Worked
it.
OH and that on 6 and 4
There you go.
last year.
Yeah. There you go. So you can work stuff with QRP. That's the point. Just for reference, this is the current band plan. In region 1, they've cleared this region here for digital modes, but most of the activity is still somewhat lower in frequency. We have a preserve at 50.1 to 130 for long distance contacts, which is mostly followed actually. And most of the contests now don't allow contest QSOs, point scoring QSOs in that range. And generally speaking, CW below. The beacons, this is a bone of contention in certain parts of the community, but beacons are slowly and progressively moving into this range because they've got that exclusive as well. So SSB from 50.130 up to about 50.3, and certainly during those activity contests, that whole range is that range there is pretty full. Obviously, you could use CW anywhere. There are, I talked about beacons, there's quite a range of them. This is a page from the 6 Metre Group website where we've got a map that tells you where the beacons are, also which ones aren't working. And they're a useful propagation guide, although there's so much activity these days that they are less important than they used to be. A range of contests, just for, again, reference. There are others, but the ones if you really want to sort of get some contacts, go on the RSGB's monthly contest or do one of the 6 Metre Group contests. So we've got all the usual sort of stuff. A lot of this would apply. So how to be successful? A lot of listening. Openings can be very strong, but they can also be quick and weak. And if you're the first, you stand much more chance of working. This is the same as HM. If you stand much more chance of working the DX if you're the first one to hear it. So it's worth paying a lot of attention. Using those early warning systems. Pile-ups, in the old days we didn't have split and all that kind of stuff, but they do work split now. Don't overdrive your rig, it doesn't make you any more intelligible. You probably all know that. Well, at least you've all know people who don't do it. The interesting thing is that actually the same thing can happen on digital. If you overdrive the audio into the rig, you get spuriae of various kinds.
Yeah, the one thing I keep telling people is there's a setting in WSJT which I think should be mandatory, that's the split.
Yes.
Otherwise
Yeah.
you're transmitting your second and third audio harmonics all over the place and it's horrible.
Yeah, even with a decent, with the tone, it might be 30 dBs, 40 dBs down, but people can still hear it.
Yeah.
So do check your audio if you're having a go at digital. Some useful resources. So 6 Metre Group website's got lots of stuff on it. There is a members only section to it, but that's just the magazine. So the rest of it is open. There's quite a nice, we call it the DX desktop, which has got a range of, it actually goes quite a lot further down than this, a cluster map of our own. You can hover over one of those dots and it will tell you who the contact is between, chat links and also solar data all on there. I talked about the ON4KST chat, very useful for spotting openings. dxmaps.com by EA6VQ does the same sort of thing, and the digital modes can all be configured by just clicking on a little button to automatically feed reports into PSK Reporter. And obviously I would say this, wouldn't I, join 6 Metre Group, thank you. Because that way you get 6 News. If you're interested in 6 News, have a look on the website. There's always we do print it and post it to people, but also there's a digital version which some people prefer just to have, and there's always a sample 6 News up on the website that anybody can download. So just for a final whet your appetite.
Japan 5-2, uniform Sierra 42 on 6 meters only.
They're quite old, yes, but
Sky QSY down to band
good.
around 50.100 KP2 QSY.
now actually that was F2, but KP2 can be worked quite easily on sporadic key in the well, I say that. If you're in the right place at the right time, there are usually several openings that have
You are also 5 and 9 plus, 5 and 9 plus. India 21, India 21 at Eastern Peru. Yourself?
Yeah, and I worked Peru last summer, I worked Brazil last summer, and various other stuff. And actually the best QSO in many ways was, I had the beam as is on FT8, I was been pointing in North America, and I started to see there was nothing happening. I started to see contacts inside the US, and I called this guy, and he immediately after the contact emailed me, and he sent me a QSL card. It was his first time he'd ever worked Europe on 6 meters, and I just sort of fell over him. So he was in the right place at the right time.
My place of Peter 73, this is Mountain MB5 Charlie Charlie. My train is Guatemala 57 Georgia.
So, there you go. I'm happy to talk about other stuff, but any questions would be very welcome. It doesn't take much to get on. You can work stuff, and once you get the bug, you might find you want to do something else, something better. We all started with I started with a dipole. It is addictive because there's that old DX thing. Oh, hang on, if I just wait a little bit longer, it might come back. Have a look at the website. Blah, blah, blah. Any questions? Any more questions?
Have you got any pictures of aerial setups? Are you angling up at the sky to get this, or?
No, you're not angling up at the sky. I've got a picture of my aerial with another presentation on there, but no, it's an interesting question because on VHF normally for ground wave tropo type propagation you need a very low angle propagation, and it's certainly also true that the lowest, if you can imagine the globe, the furthest hops you're going to get are again going to be at low angles. So from that point of view, you don't want to be pointing up in the sky. But a single hop sporadic E contact could be probably 10 degrees above the horizon.
You're showing 300 kilometres.
Well, exactly. Well, that's very yeah. Well, I mean, so sporadic E layer's 100 kilometres. If he's 400 kilometres away, halfway, so you're 30 degrees.
It's deeper, isn't it?
So you can work things from a hole. It might be a noisy hole, and that's something we can't do anything about. But the takeoff angles can be quite high, yes. And so you might have a crap VHF site, but you can still work things on sporadic.
What do you think about low noise antennas?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Well, I'm not going to advertise.
No.
But I use Justin's antennas now, Innov antennas, not because they've got more forward gain, because they haven't really, but they're quieter off the side. Yeah. It just is. I used to have M squared JHV, so 7 elements. So it's quite big antennas. But in terms of noise off the side, the Innov antenna stuff is definitely better.
So
in my opinion.
You rate that approach as
that approach, yeah, the loops.
Yeah, I find the loop fed array is much quieter than
Yeah, and obviously it's quieter off the sides this way.
Yeah.
It's also quieter off the side upwards because you get galactic noise as well.
Because your house and your next door neighbour are nearest.
Absolutely. I mean, unfortunately, I've got. I live in a sort of semi-rural area, so some directions are really quite quiet. But if I point towards the village, and obviously no amount of clean antenna is going to get rid of that. Unfortunately, if the station I want to work is that way, so it's sort of 10 dB noisier that way.
Somebody had this theory that they should, because the noise of they should put this kilowatt
No, it doesn't work that way. But digital is better for that kind of situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
You don't see the hands over there somewhere? No?
Right, yeah, dumb question. I guess single hop sporadic is extremely strong, obviously.
Can be, usually.
So
but even then it could be just coming in or just going out. So
how do you dig the double hop out of it? At least, I don't know if it's the same place.
Well, I said that there was that sort of DX region that we generally, it's a gentleman's agreement type thing,
Right.
There's actually a move from the States to have a separate FT8 window along the same lines,
Right.
But it's like digging out DX on any band, really. You have to listen and
Yeah.
Having a pan adapter.
dig it out.
Yeah. Having a pan adapter helps because you
Yeah.
can start to see things like video signals from the east. That's always a good sign.
Yeah, I mean, I'm an SDR convert, and so I find you can look at the whole band and, oh, there's something over there,
Yeah.
click, you know.
Are you very often tempted to move up to 4 metres?
Personally, personally, I'm interested in propagation research, and I need to have a decent antenna for that. And I've got an XY, one of Justin's 7 X poles, and it's a bit of a beast, and I don't think I can get anything else on the mast, I'm afraid. At least not safely. Maybe in the future. But these days, it's a lot of the same people. We even thought about changing the name of the group to the 6 and 4 or something, but that would just be, I don't know. It's a brand that everybody knows now, and we were advised not to do that. But they're usually the same people, and most of the same countries, although they're not as lucky as we are. Obviously, we got 6 and 4 before most of Europe did.
I think
I know 28 megs is a wide band, but
Yeah.
do you ever get it that the bottom part is quite lively and the top half is dead?
Well, 28 is true, but also 6.
I'm
Yeah.
saying.
Some people will tell you that you can actually sort of see the MUF creep up. I think you've got to be quite quick to see it go. I think with F2, it's more pronounced, would be my estimation. One of the reasons people don't like the idea of moving the beacons above 50.4 is because of that exact reason, that it's 300 or 400 kilohertz higher up the band. And that's why we argued that we should retain a slot down the bottom for DX-oriented beacons, and that was the sort of origins of the synchronized beacon channel. That's really just, it's only staggering into life, really. And there's about 6 beacons now on that, and they all multi-hop, they hop between operating in the shared segment right at the bottom of the band, and they're at a frequency up in 50.4 as well. So they're on all the time, but they just hop between them too.
Yeah, my experience of these is you've got to be quick.
Yeah. And that's
Or sometimes just patient. I've seen spots where I've had to wait listening for half an hour for the opening to begin.
well. The thing is that you could be with your dipole and your 100 watts here, and some bloke over there, 10 miles away, could have a much bigger station, but you can hear it and he can't. And that's the nature of sporadic E. You've got to be in the right place at the right time, and sometimes it's not the guy with the biggest station that gets through. But as you say, patience, yes. Yeah, keep listening, patience. Certainly when it comes to looking for the long DX, you sort of work out roughly when it's likely to be. So the JAs will be sort of 7, 8, 9 o'clock in the morning. To the west, it will tend to be sort of afternoon and evening, to North America. And you just keep looking and listening and watching what other people are working. Because there's some people would say, well, there's no point in having that information, because if you can't hear it, just because he can hear it doesn't mean you can, but you can see it move. Sporadic E tends to move, well, in fact both, and F2 as well, they tend to move west to east. And sort of like that.
I think you mean east to west.
I mean east to west. Thank you. I've been working on that. No, you're quite absolutely.
It moves around.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can watch the pattern of it. This is only on 2 meters.
As well.
Yeah, if you watch DX maps, you can generally see, it should be with us in half an hour or something.
Yeah. Exactly. Are we done? I think we're done.
Why so many beacons off the air at the same time?
That's interesting, wasn't it? I'm not sure whether that's really
It's about
representative or not.
20% of the glass.
Yeah, well, beacons rely on somebody keeping them going.
Oh yeah, surely. I mean, you've got the goodwill and etc. etc.
And once they've been. I mean, at the moment, in the UK, I think 3 are on and 3 are off. I think right now, but it relies on somewhere. And part of the problem is that they stay on the beacon list, even though they're not actually active anymore. And it's quite a job to keep up to date with what's actually going on.
Okay, well, on behalf of the club, I'd like to say thank you, Chris, for a very interesting talk. Thank you very much. And please join us with some tea and John's luxurious biscuits.
Whoa.